Pros and cons of a U.S. corporation, like a C-CORP. I'm talking specifically about a C-CORP. Anybody have a C-CORP? Only a couple of you. 3 or 4, looks like. Okay, so pros and cons of a C-CORP. So first of all, for you non-Americans, maybe you don't know this, so I'll tell you. There is no such thing as a U.S. corporation. No such thing. Like in Europe, you have a German company, you have a Dutch company, you have a French company. There's no such thing as an American company. The U.S. has 50 states plus several territories. Companies, corporations, and LLCs and other entities, they're registered at the state level, not the federal level. I generalize the topic with U.S. corporation, but just to be clear, there's no such thing as a U.S. federal corporation. You would register a corporation in Delaware or Wyoming or Florida or Nevada, something like that. Just to clarify, don't go looking up, Bobby's wrong, there is no such thing as a C-Corp, a U.S. C-Corp. They are state and territory. Like Puerto Rico is not a state, but you can register a corporation in Puerto Rico. And DC, actually. Access to a large market, various business support services. It does give you a lot of access, especially to banking, payment processing, lending agreements. My God, in the US, you can get a loan for literally anything. If you are doing e-commerce and you want loans to finance your inventory, all you got to do is look left or right and somebody's trying to give you a loan for your inventory. If you're trying to scale your business, the US could be a good option for you because all of that is available. They're excellent banking and other financial services, like I mentioned, and it is specifically Delaware is the best option if you plan to raise money from investors, VCs, or you're planning to get large credit lines. Now, large credit lines, I'm talking like in the tens of millions. I don't mean $100,000 or $250,000 credit line. In that case, a Delaware C-Corp is going to be ideal. The reason being, Delaware has a very specific court system for businesses, and your lenders will prefer you to have a Delaware C-Corp because if they need to sue you, disputes get resolved much faster. So it's an advantage for them for you to be a Delaware C-Corp. I had a client a couple of years ago, like 4 years ago, we registered a Wyoming C-Corp because it's way easier, so much less hassle than Delaware. We registered a Wyoming C-Corp for him, and then he got an investor that wanted to put in $4 million into his business, and they said, we're willing to put it in, but only if you move the company to Delaware. What do you think? What do you think we did? You're right. We moved it to Delaware. Like, it is not necessarily any difference for you legally, but it is an advantage if you're trying to raise money because your lenders will look more favorably upon a Delaware corp. If you are not looking for that, I would avoid Delaware, to be honest. Delaware is a hassle to deal with. It's expensive. If you're like 5 minutes late on your annual report filing, they tack on late fees. Especially for corporations, it's super expensive. I had one Delaware C-Corp we renew every year. It's $46,000 a year to renew his C-Corp. $46,000 a year. If he had that company registered in Wyoming, it's, I don't know, a couple of $100. Because of the number of shares and the value of his shares. In Delaware, they treat it completely differently. Don't do Delaware unless you absolutely need it. I would even recommend if you're starting a business and you think 5 years later you might need it, let's start it in Wyoming first and let's move it to Delaware because it's so much a hassle to deal with. Everybody reads all about Delaware, how amazing it is. Yes, in that scenario it is, but if you don't need it, avoid it. Downsides, complex tax regulations, lots of compliance, and right now it's a 21% corporate tax. However, there is a way to cut that corporate tax in half. It's a loophole that if we create an offshore subsidiary and we run all your profits through your offshore sub, we can get you a 50% corporate tax rate deduction. So depending on the structure you're doing and the nature of your business, you might be able to cut your corporate tax rate in half. So a C-Corp might be a viable solution for you if all of the other things make a lot of sense. Pros and cons of a U.S. LLC. I bet a bunch of you have an LLC in the U.S. Anyone? So same like corporations, there's no such thing as a U.S. LLC. They're registered by the state. You can see down here, these are the most common ones that we register LLCs for. Wyoming, Delaware, Nevada, Florida, or New Mexico are the most common. And to be honest, Wyoming, we register a lot of LLCs literally every day. And 70% of the companies we register are Wyoming. 20% are the other 10% is everything else. Flexibility in management structure, pass-through taxation. It is excellent if you're not an American. By the way, did anyone know the U.S. is the largest tax haven in the world?
Yes.
Anyone know that? Yeah. Largest tax haven in the world by a very large margin, by the way. Actually, if you add up assets under management in all of the other tax havens combined, the offshore assets in the U.S. is bigger than all of the other countries combined. Except just not for Americans. It's just not a great tax haven for Americans. What makes it really nice, though, is if you are a non-U.S. person and you do not have nexus or ECI. Nexus is a physical connection to the jurisdiction, like an office, a warehouse, employees, that sort of thing. And ECI means effectively connected income to a trade or business in the U.S. If you don't have nexus or ECI in the U.S., you have no tax, and you're not a U.S. person. Okay, U.S. person meaning you're not a U.S. citizen or green card holder. So you're not a U.S. person and you have no nexus or ECI, then you don't have a tax obligation in the U.S. You do have a tax filing obligation, but you file 2 forms 1 time a year, and that's it. One of the forms is 3 pages, and one of them is an income statement, so it could be 4, 5, 6 pages. But it's a one-time filing you file once a year, making it ridiculously easy, and you have no tax obligation. So non-U.S. persons, this is great. Now, the downside over here, depending on your tax residency, like I mentioned before with Costa Rica, if you are a Costa Rican resident, pass-through income into Costa Rica would be taxable to you in Costa Rica. So that would be a case like where you might want a hybrid structure with or not a hybrid, but a holding company structure in place to retain those earnings. Simple banking, access to Stripe, PayPal, merchant processing, I mentioned the company estates, complex tax filings and regulations if you have nexus or ECI. Although there are ways to optimize that. There are things you can do. For example, you can break out pieces of your business. I have another client, I think he's German also, but he has an e-com business in the US, pretty good size, 7-figure e-com business, but he does a ton of digital marketing. So the e-com business, it has ECI because he sells physical products into the US market. So he does create a tax obligation there. However, he created a digital marketing agency to outsource the marketing of his product business to the digital marketing agency, so that allows him to strip some of the profits out of the physical product business. And the digital marketing agency, because it's virtual and it does not have ECI or Nexus and he's not a US person, that piece of the business is not taxable in the US. So we were able to strip or reduce his tax rate a lot by having a hybrid company structure, splitting it in 2.